I think that there's a lot of different ways the new global order could go, right? I definitely think China's ascending, obviously. The U.S. is going to have a new place. I don't know necessarily whether it's going to, sometimes you hear the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
Okay, it could be the fall of Rome, but the fall of Rome took centuries.
Centuries, yes.
It's not overnight, all of a sudden China has the big stick.
Hi everyone, my name is Edurney and welcome back to another episode of Story of My Life. Today with us we have my good friend Edurney Arostegui. She is a historian, she teaches music, she teaches how to cook, she does a lot of things. So we will talk about all of these things in this interview today. Edurney, thank you so much for being the part of this show. And
thank you so
to the
much.
Show.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm very, very excited to talk to you. Thank you.
Of course, and it's a pleasure to have you on our show. So we will talk about all of different aspects of your life. So basically you were born and raised as a first generation immigrant. How was your experience like growing up in US?
I'd say like the first couple years, which not that I remember, but I can imagine them being very much as if I'd grown up over there as opposed to here in the States. I mean, my grandmother came to raise me, so I grew up speaking Spanish. I didn't learn English until I went to school. I was, brought up eating the foods that we would eat over there, etc. So I think it was more when I went to school, which I actually went, I think, quite young, 3.5, 4, or something like that, that I realized that other people spoke English and that, not everybody was like me. So, but yeah, I mean, I think once I did go to school and I realized that my parents weren't from there and just kind of, meeting other kids and them talking about their cousins or, their grandparents. And, for me, they were just so far away. It was such a different experience for me. I didn't get to celebrate Christmas with the family. I mean, I celebrated it with my parents and my sister, but that was our family.
Makes sense. So when you went to school and you didn't know how to speak English at the time, right? Was it hard, or did you feel somehow left out, or was it hard to communicate with other kids, make friends?
I don't think so, because for the most part, I think kids really make themselves understood, and my parents did put me in a very small school, so definitely got a lot of the attention that I needed from my teachers in order to learn the language and whatnot. But I do remember certain moments of, being made fun of because of my accent, or, later on in life, I ran into someone who I knew when I was in like first grade or something like that. I can't remember. And we talked for a little bit and then she was like, wait, like, didn't you have an accent? And I was like, oh, you're right. I did at some point in my life, but I'd completely forgotten about it at that point.
Okay. And at some point, you moved back to Spain, right?
Mm-hmm.
When was this, and how was that experience like, living all your life, most of your life in the United States, and going back to your roots back in Spain? And how did that change your perspective about US and Spain?
Oh, it changed things. I mean, I spent 7 years in total, living in Spain and in the Basque Country. And it definitely changed my views of both places. I think I had a kind of romanticized vision of what the Basque Country was or what Spain was. And I probably had a much more negative view of the United States, to be honest. And it was once I went there that I realized there were so many things that I had grown up with that I really appreciate and had taken for granted. But the story that led me there is actually, I had no intention of living there. I actually had booked a flight for 6 months. I was going to spend some time with my grandma, taking care of her, spending some time with my uncles, just kind of relaxing after my undergrad. I wasn't sure if I was going to go into music or history at that point, so I went over. And as I said, my plan was to be there for 6 months, but about, let's say, 3 months in, I got offered a job at the local school teaching piano, musicianship, English, and guitar. And I was like, okay, I can do this for a while. I'm having fun. The health of my family was definitely declining. And I thought it would be a good thing for me to be there and take care of them and, you know, work. And it's not like I was going to apply to grad school yet. So, turned into a year. Then I ended up moving to the Basque Country to spend more time with my dad's side of the family. And then I started a master's degree. Then I started my PhD. And it wasn't until there was an opening here at UNR that I even thought about coming back, to be honest.
Wow, that is a wild journey. You went there for 6 months and ended up spending 7 years almost.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. You mentioned music. So you went to Berkeley to study music. Before we go into what inspired you to study music, I would like to know, was it hard to get into Berkeley? And how was, your experience like?
Yes. I mean, of course, it was hard to get in. I actually did my first 2 years of university at the University of California, Santa Cruz, UCSC. And there they actually have quite the performance department when it comes to music. And that's what I really thought that I'd be doing at that point. I wanted to perform music. I wanted to be on stage. But it was probably within like a quarter or two, they're on the quarter system, that I realized that what I really enjoyed about music was writing about it and studying it and analyzing it and more of the nerdy aspects of music. So after 2 years, I transferred to UC Berkley. Getting in and all of that stuff, high school was definitely hard. High school was hard. It was all pretty much spent going towards, trying to get to a good university and getting as many scholarships as possible. So I spent a lot of time, getting good grades and whatnot, but also doing all the extracurricular activities that I could. I started working when I was 14 at a restaurant. So it was, just trying to do as many things as possible in order to get in. And then, of course, just lucky to have good teachers in school. I didn't have a lot of prep and whatnot that other people might go through before they apply to college, but I had a nice support system from my, normal teachers in high school. So definitely made a difference. But then when it comes to music, I think the number one influence would probably be my father. He's always played music. They joke, my parents, I think this has to do with what you were saying with learning English and whatnot. I think I might have been a little confused as a child when I did hear other people speaking in other languages. So according to my parents, it took me a long time to speak. That being said, once I started talking, I didn't stop, okay? But when I was a baby, there's all these recordings of me singing. And I'm not singing words, but just singing melodies and this and that. Like our answering machine was me singing the weather report or something like that for a while. And it was something that I really just, to this day, I just love it. Like I listen to music and I can focus on it completely. Like for instance, yesterday I was trying to talk to my sister on the phone while I had music on, and I had to turn the music off because I couldn't pay attention to her while John Coltrane was playing in the background. So definitely my father. And so I think besides in preschool doing music, Mrs. Benson, I even remember her name. She also was she was, we did all sorts of, I went to Montessori school. So everything was very interactive and xylophones and this and that. And as I said, once I started talking, I lost all shyness that I ever had. I think my first performance was when I was 4.
Wow.
And I went up and sang some Spanish Christmas carols, dressed up as an angel. I didn't care. I loved it. I loved it up there. And the first instrument that I studied was piano. I'm not sure. I want to say I was 5 when I started, more or less.
That's early.
But I was definitely 5 or 6. I was very young when I started playing the piano. My dad found... We used to go to garage sales and whatnot, and there was a Rhodes piano, a keyboard, not a piano, for sale, and they purchased it, and soon after I was taking lessons and playing it until they realized that I really liked it, and my sister started playing as well, and that's when we purchased the piano that I've been playing ever since.
And right now you are studying history. And could you tell us about what specifically you are studying? And
my evolution or in history or the different things that I've done are, they're manifold. When I went to UC Santa Cruz, I declared history within the first quarter. I accidentally, I guess, took an upper division history class. I think part of being, first generation American and, my parents didn't go to university, definitely didn't go to university here. I didn't have the background information as to what you're supposed to do, etc.
Career counseling.
Yeah, none of that. So, I had no idea that if you signed up for a class that was over 100, it was upper division. But, I did it, and it was a tough class. It was rethinking the Holocaust, and it was all about, let's say, the positive aspects of the Nazi regime in Germany without, we're not condoning what happened, right? But more of an emphasis on health and, the sorts of cancer research that they did.
They were doing a lot of innovation as well, right?
Yes. The Nazis knew that tobacco was a carcinogen in the 1930s when the U.S. didn't really admit to it, or U.S. scientists didn't really, do much until the 1970s, right? So they were very ahead. There was all sorts of initiatives to eat, whole wheat bread, things that we all do now. We know that are good, right? But it's as if, these things just kind of got forgotten or dismissed, obviously, because they were done doing a little bit of, let's say, not the best sort of science, right? Experimenting on humans. This is not good. As I said, we don't condone these things, but it's also interesting to note, all the cancer research that they did, right? Why didn't we did continue on in some Nazi endeavors, in the sense of most of our NASA program was begun by Nazi scientists, but then in other things we did not, right? So that was the first history class I took, full of seniors in college. I definitely had to step up, and I think, within that first quarter, I went and I was like, I want to be a historian. I'd initially applied to college as an English major, actually. Was very interested in writing, and then I realized that with history I could write and do history, so it was like, that's the one for me. So due to that class and many other things, I ended up doing my undergrad basically focusing on European history and then German history overall. So I wrote my undergraduate thesis on World War I, or on the effects of World War I on Germans, through an analysis of literature and art, right? And I just became very, very passionate about German history right up until the Second World War, really focused on the first, and that was what I was doing. Everything was complementing that as well. So, for instance, in music, I studied a lot of, Weimar Republic music in Germany. I studied German. It was very much, that was what was top of mind for me.
You spent some time in Germany as well,
I
right?
also, I was part of a program that got, the first that got sent to Germany and do research there and archives, etc., paid for by the DAAD, which is the German Academic Exchange.
DAAD, right?
DAAD. And that was an amazing experience. I really thought that...
Was it fascinating to be on the sites you were studying in the books?
Oh, I had déjà vu all the time, in Berlin more than anything. I loved... We stayed in Frankfurt, in Munich, and in Berlin. And I think it was one of the first nights we were in Berlin, we were just walking around as a group, and I just kept having these weird, senses of, I've been here, right? But I'd seen so many pictures, and I'd read so many things, and it's like, you hear about street names and all of this, and it's just like, you're living in the history that you've been studying. So there really was nothing quite like that. And initially, when I did move to Spain, I did look into programs to see if I could maybe go to Germany and spend some time there, work and improve on my German, maybe do some research in the archives, etc. But as, family responsibilities kind of took hold, that kind of got put on the back burner, and things changed radically because, as you said, I went back to my roots, And it was there that I realized, I didn't know enough about my Basque heritage
culture,
or even Spanish history and all of these things. So I enrolled in a master's program at the University of the Basque Country, and it's European history, let's say. I mean, Spanish history above all, Basque history. And did 2 years of that and became fascinated.
So right now you're studying basically immigrated women, especially Basque women. So I always am curious about how the time has evolved or the circumstances have evolved for women in Europe and in particular in America as well. So what major differences you see and what propelled those changes in these societies according to your studies?
I think that, the status of women is always unequal in different places. It's not always possible to equate things in one place and another. We also have to think about but other issues like the urban-rural divide, for instance. I think that a woman in the Basque Country in the early, or in the late 19th century who lived on a farm, I don't think her life was that different from a woman in, Kansas living on a farm here in the United States, right? I think that it doesn't really matter where they are. It's that rural life that really, the division of labor. And then actually, most people don't think about this way, but in rural settings and farm settings, there is a certain level of, equality to a certain sense, right? Everybody needs to work together to make the household survive, right?
Everybody has a specific responsibility they have to do.
Exactly.
Right.
So, for instance, my advisor's work on the French Basque Country, she talks about how they call it berdin, right? So equal. Yeah. And yes, the house, the home, is the domain of the woman, right? But then the man is, out with the animals, this and that. But they all respect each other because they know that without the other one, things wouldn't happen, right? It isn't until, in my opinion, or kind of, my view of history, it isn't until we start working for wages outside of the household that a lot of these things start to take foot, right? And because men are the ones that are allowed to leave the home and they're allowed to work in public spaces, they become the breadwinners, and then women kind of lose that status, right? Because they become more dependent on their husbands, etc. But at the same time, there are certain things, certain societal structures that people want to escape. So in the case of Basque women, I don't think that they were, it's... I wouldn't say it's a matriarchal society, but I wouldn't say, it was a terrible, inequality. But here, they were liberated by familial ties, right? I'm not saying that they don't love their families or things like that, right? But you're finally able to express yourself when you're in a place that you're new, where you don't know people, right? Where you're, it's like, oh, she's so-and-so's granddaughter. No, all of that goes away, right? So and you're finally able to just be yourself. You're no longer the son of so-and-so. You are Edurney, right? And that has been, in my research on women and men in general in migration to the United States, I think that's one of the most salient factors, is that people are finally...
So all of this change happened internally, like no external force was involved to bring this change. Is that true?
I think that there are external forces too, because in the case of migration to the United States, but in the case of migration anywhere, you...
No. In terms of women empowerment, for example, women who migrated from Basque Country to United States. I mean, they were here, they could express because they were in a new society. They had no ties, or they didn't have any burden or baggage which could hold them back, and they were whoever they want to be. Yeah. Right?
Exactly. But then at the same time, so this is why these things are, these forces are intertwined, let's put it that way, right? So at the same time as it's liberating, right, to be away from your family to a certain extent, the fact that you're not with your family or with an extended household means that you need to support yourself, right? You need to do things that perhaps you didn't have to in your country of origin, right? Most of the women that I interviewed and that I've researched worked before they came here and worked outside of the household. But here, there's no fallback. Here, when you migrate, when you leave everything behind, you have to make things work out. So at the same time as it's liberating, I mean, it might be liberating as well to go make your own money, right? But there's a lot more pressure put on you, right, to succeed. You don't have that safety net of people around you at the same time, right? And you're trying to prove yourself to a certain extent.
You're a historian. You have a very keen eye on the current affairs happening all over the world right now. So my last question before we wrap up this interview is like, how do you see the near future changing in the world? Because what we are observing now in what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening between China and America right now, different kind of crises happening all over the world. Like, what do you see in next 5 to 10 years happening in terms of economics, in terms of like maybe relationship between different countries, specifically America and China?
Oof, it's a loaded question. I'm going to start with kind of a more global answer to what you're asking. Maybe it's almost like a call for action, but I think that at the same time as we're becoming more and more, interlinked, right? Communication and travel is just so much easier, right? I can have friends in Japan and talk to them every day, right? And you can live a whole life pretending you're in a different country and pretty much do that, right? And I feel like I don't know who or what the forces are, right? But I'm not going to get into those sorts of things. But they're trying to divide people.
Okay.
When in reality, like, I think that we have a lot more things in common, right? Like, for instance, we were talking about Facebook earlier, right? And I'll get back to your original question, right? But I think, for instance, liberals and conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they all hate Facebook. Yeah. Like, why do we blame each other instead of getting together and blaming Facebook? That's just an example, right? Like, why is everything moving towards this fracturization, right, as things are becoming more connected? So I think that there's a lot of different ways the new global order could go, right? I definitely think China's ascending, obviously. The U.S. is going to have a new place. I don't know necessarily whether it's going to, sometimes you hear the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
Okay, it could be the fall of Rome, but the fall of Rome took centuries.
Centuries, yes.
It's not overnight, all of a sudden China has the big stick, right? And what you do during these decades, what happens in the next couple of decades, centuries, is going to be pivotal, right? I mean, I don't think we can change the fact. I mean, China has more people. China has more resources. It's destined to do better than we do to a certain extent. But it's not about just falling. It's about trying to engage, right? And why does it have to be a competition?
Either China or America. Why cannot both coexist?
I mean, why do we have to compete? I mean, we need each other.
Yeah, definitely.
China needs us just as much as we need them. Yeah. Like, if China, it produces a lot, but it's not the internal market.
Yeah.
They need people to purchase it, right? And who are the biggest purchasers of Chinese goods? The United States, and right?
Europeans, yeah.
So what if instead of thinking about these as, these sort of confrontations, which is very human, I would say, like sociologically speaking, we've been fighting since always, right?
Yeah.
We can't really get rid of that, right? I don't think that we're going to be, everything's going to be peace and hippies and, I don't know, rainbows and cookies. But at the same time, we need to rethink the way that we work together, and we need to realize that we are all just so connected. So when you're talking about, events in China or what's going on in Afghanistan and the Middle East and everything like that, we can focus on the U.S., right? Yeah. But what about the impact of these things on Mexico, right? It might not be the biggest, I can't think of anything 100% right now, but everybody's affected by these things.
Yes, definitely.
Not just the two aggressors or every single person is. So what if we started thinking about it more globally?
For example, it changes the global economy, and that impacts a small business owner in Gilgit in Pakistan. I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and he was complaining about how the 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 inflation is impacting his business. So like all of these things are impacting each one of us living in this world eventually.
I think that, there's a lot of critique of globalization, and I can understand for, in certain aspects why, globalization can be a problematic thing, but I think what people need to realize is that it's not new. That globalization didn't just start. It didn't start in the 90s, didn't start in the 20th century. It started thousands of years ago. Yeah. I mean, if we look at ancient, let's just not even go that far back. Let's just go to the Greeks.
Yeah.
And the whole Mediterranean era, that was already globalizing. You had people who knew multiple languages to ease the exchange of goods. Do we talk about capitalism in that period? No, because it's not capitalism. Yeah. That's the thing is that globalization is, in my opinion, more of a human endeavor than some sort of economic system from above. Yeah. And we can't just fight it. I mean,
we have to accept it.
We have to accept it.
And put systems in place so that it doesn't negatively impact all of us.
Exactly. And borders are not real. I mean, look at these geese behind us, right? Like
they just go from maybe Mexico. Like you don't see them in winter here. For example, they just migrate.
Because they're migrating, right? And migration is the. I mean, it's not the key to everything, but we've never stopped migrating.
Yes.
Migration is, we talk about the waves of migration at the end of the 19th century into the United States. Yes, that was a huge phenomenon, and there are many reasons for that phenomenon. But, people have been migrating, I don't know, but I'm guessing, I don't know as much about the Middle East and the subcontinent, but like, I'm sure that there was massive migrations into and out of what is Pakistan now, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What's new is artificial borders.
Yes.
It's and imposing some sort of...
And this like close-mindedness as
exactly.
well, right? So we have to basically somehow place systems in place or educate masses in this regard so that everybody's open to these new ideas and open to new societies and people migrating from different cultures. So that's a very good
I think
insight.
We need to just, as a, global community, we need to realize that, we need to work together. We have a lot more things in common than we do different, right? One of the quotes, not an anthropologist, but one of the quotes that, has impacted me quite a bit, and it's not my field or anything like that, but Franz Boas, I'm going to paraphrase here, right? But there are more differences inside of races than from one race to another, right? And I mean, I don't know how I even feel about the concept of race, but when I started thinking about that, I was like, you know what? This applies to everything. There's we are way more diverse as Americans than comparing an American to a Turk, right? The Turkish person and the American person probably have a lot more in common than an American from California and an American from Nebraska.
Yep.
So I think that once we start thinking about things in these terms as being humans and being together and needing each other, as opposed to thinking of ways of dividing ourselves into little groups, then we'll be able to appreciate the positive aspects of globalization and perhaps par down the more negative, more competitive aspects of our nature.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can invite you again and we can continue this topic. There are a lot of things I wanted to talk about, but due to time, we have to wrap up our interview today. This was Edurney's Story of Life. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We will be back with another story next time. Thank you so much, Story of My Life.
Smash that like button.